For those who have come in, I know there will be some other folks who will be hopping on the call. I want to welcome everybody to this event. I want to thank the folks at New Rican Poets Cafe for hosting this event. And I want to thank my friend Kevin Powell for asking me to join him in this event, which is really a book launch kind of event for him. And it's a different kind of event because it's a different kind of book. Kevin, who I'll tell you more about if you don't know. I mean, I figure you know who Kevin is and you probably know who I am, but I'll tell you more in a second. This is his 14th book, and it's really the first one that he's done this way, which is to be done through, I think it's Apple Books. Is that right, Kevin? A direct relationship with them. So it's being done directly and put out electronically for folks to be able to get without having to go through the normal publishing house rigmarole that both Kevin and I know a little something about, and it can eat you alive in a lot of ways when you're a writer. So he wanted to get this out as quickly as possible in as many hands as possible. And he has now done that. And so this is sort of a launch event for that book, which is When We Free the World. And he'll tell you a little bit about how you can get that during the course of our conversation. Let me just make sure you know who you are here to listen to, at least substantively tonight. Kevin Powell, who I'll be in dialogue with, is one of the most prolific literary, political, cultural, and hip hop voices in America, a poet, journalist, blogger, civil and human rights activist, public speaker, filmmaker, former two-time candidate for the U.S. Congress from New York, and as I said, the author of or editor of 14 books in all. His writings have appeared in many different publications over the years, both in the United States and around the world. His critically acclaimed memoir, The Education of Kevin Powell, A Boy's Journey into Manhood, is being adapted for television. His next book, which I know he has been slowly birthing for years now, wanting to get this one out. I look forward to it. Is a biography of Tupac Shakur. As a speaker, Kevin has lectured across the country and internationally in Japan, the UK, Nigeria. He has also been a visiting scholar at several colleges, including Stanford, Dillard, James Madison, and he lives in New York City, as he says in his bio, on the planet of Brooklyn. It is good to be with Kevin tonight. I am Tim Wise. I'm an anti-racism educator, activist, and author of 8 books, including what will be actually my 8th or 9th, depending on how you count them, but it doesn't really matter. Coming out in December, a collection of essays called Dispatches from the Race War. I'm also the author of White Like Me, Reflections on Race from a Privileged Son, Dear White America, Letters to a New Minority, and several others. I've known Kevin for many years, and we have sort of talked about this dialogue that we wanted to do publicly for at least 14 years. I think the first time we started talking about it was probably around 2006, and never did come together. And then last year, or 2 years ago, actually in 2018, we tried to do it, and some stuff got in the way of that. And Kevin, when you read When We Free the World, which you should, his new book talks a little bit about what intervened and how 2018 was for him. And I think I want to start there by asking Kevin something about that, because not about our interrupted event. That's sort of a minor story in Kevin's life and not really worth taking a whole lot of time on. But I do want to start by talking a little bit about something you discuss very transparently and very openly in the book. And that is that 2018 was for you personally a truly horrific year. And I think here we are in 2020, seeing a horrific year for millions and millions of people in the middle of the coronavirus crisis, the killing of Black folk by law enforcement and or vigilantes. In the most obvious cases of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. We've lost some incredible anti-racist civil rights leaders in just the last several months: Joseph Lowery, C.T. Vivian, John Lewis. There is not a lot to recommend 2020 except for the uprising that is in its sort of nascent early form right now, and really the largest racial justice uprising in history. So maybe that will redeem 2020. It remains to be seen. But having written so poignantly about 2018 and some of the struggles and the things that you had to shore up against and persevere through, what did you learn? First of all, feel free to talk about any or all of that you think is pertinent for this evening. And what did that year and the struggles about which you speak in the book teach you about yourself as an artist, as a man, as a human being? And what are some lessons that you learned that we as a country, in the midst of a horrible year, right, could potentially learn and apply as well in our day-to-day lives. Because I think when you come through struggle, when you come through the fire, right, you learn something about yourself, and the rest of us can learn something from you. So talk a little bit about 2018, what it taught you and what it can teach us in this moment.
Well, I mean, first of all, I just want to thank you, Tim, so very much. You know, I have great respect for you. And I want to encourage folks to please follow Tim across social media long before folks jumped on the wave that we see now of Black Lives Matter. Tim has been an incredible ally, someone in solidarity with people of color. And I just want to acknowledge that. And please check out many of his recent blogs that I've been reading religiously as they've been going live on medium.com. And I just think, you know, it's important to say that because as we talk about resources, you know, Brother Tim is one of our great resources in this country around race and anti-racism work. So I want to acknowledge that. I want to thank the New York Poets Cafe, Jason, Nick, Daniel, all the entire team there. I first set foot in the New York Poets Cafe in 1990 as a very young poet and was terrified and, you know, won the slam contest and, you know, met Miguel Algarin and Bob Holman and the whole crew. And just want to acknowledge the importance of the New York Poets Cafe. Please support them as one of our great cultural institutions, not just in New York City, but on the entire planet. People literally from around the world have come to this space. I wrote this book, Tim, When We Free the World. And it's interesting. The original title was going to be I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free, which Billy Taylor, the great jazz musician, wrote. And Nina Simone made probably most famously in the 1960s. And I was just like, the title's way too long, you know what I'm saying? And one of my fraternity brothers, David Young out of Ohio, suggested, you know, well, what about When We Free the World? I was like, that's it. The cover, which is young people of all different backgrounds, all different races and colors intentionally, is inspired by a great Richard Avedon poem, a photo, from the 1960s, where you see black and white young people, civil rights workers together. Most prominently is Julian Bond, another one of our great leaders who died a couple years ago, at the front of it. And you're right, rest in peace to Joseph Lowery, C.T. Vivian, John Lewis. We live in their legacy. I, like you, Tim, I write essays, or what some people call blogs, you know, to get things off my chest. You know, my sheroes and heroes are people like Bell Hooks, like James Baldwin, like Mailer, you know, folks who just, you know, try to tell the truth as best they can, and oftentimes using our own personal stories to get those truths out there. It was horrific. 2018, I was married. I'm no longer married, as I've announced on social media. My wife at the time and I were producing a very successful theater production for her called She, a Choreo Play. It ran into a huge road bump in 2018 when we had to shut down the off-Broadway production because resources that we needed that I thought was going to come in as the producer didn't come in. That was the first blow, you know what I mean? And it was, and it left us with a huge debt, as I talk about very openly in the book. And, you know, it led to catastrophic problems, you know, as folks can imagine. You know, the second piece of it is that as this was happening in 2018, going back to the fall of 2017, my ex-wife was sent an email, one of those ugly emails that you and I both have gotten through the years, where people just lash out at us, etc. People like you and I are used to it at this point, even though it's still, I'm sure it hurts you. It hurts me at times. Some of the stuff people say about us, about our families, you know, we both have gotten death threats, stalkers, trolls, you name it. And it really disturbed my wife how this person talked to her in the email, because she's not a public figure the way we are and have been for a long time. And so I waited a couple of weeks and then I responded, you know, just trying to defend my wife, which I thought was the right thing to do. And I still think it's the right thing to do. This is in 2017. And a white person, white woman, named April Sellers from Minnesota said that we had the wrong person. We didn't know who she was when she reached back out to us. We just know someone named April Sellers had sent a really ugly, vicious email to my wife. And I had done some research and had looked it up, and that name kept coming up. And at the time it made sense because this April Sellers was a dancer choreographer like my ex-wife was. And so we didn't respond because we were honestly nervous about it, because we didn't know the state of the mental state of this person. Fast forward a month later, December 2017, we get an email from a lawyer named Aaron Scott from the national law firm Fox Rothschild, which is headquartered in Philadelphia, saying that we were being sued for somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million for defamation. And it went through, it really wasn't about my ex-wife at all. It said, well, you know, Kevin Powell, who was on MTV and is an author, celebrity author, all kinds of stuff. And, you know, you immediately realize this is a money grab. This is some sort of crazy money grab situation. We thought it was a joke. Coming into 2018, we still kind of ignored it. And then we got another note saying that this was we need to respond to this lawsuit. Long story short, we spent 2018 trying to fend off this legal situation in Minnesota where we were being accused of destroying this woman's career, of having some sort of orchestrated attack on her life and career. I want you to think about that for a second, Tim, and everyone who's listening. You know, both Tim and I are activists. We're educators. We're public speakers. We write books. We write articles. You know, before COVID hit, we traveled the country extensively. Even with COVID, both of us are tremendously busy. What activist do you know who's actually really an activist and really an educator and really about people has the time to sit around and actually try to destroy anybody? You know, particularly when their whole life work, which is well documented, you can Google Tim and you can Google I, is about like justice and truth and equality, you know, all of that kind of stuff. So it was outrageous. We thought it was a joke. The mistake that we made, Tim, was hiring the wrong lawyer the first time. This thing dragged on throughout 2018. And, you know, the next thing that we know, we were told we have to go to trial, you know, because it was a white Republican. One second, please. I'm asking folks out there, just encourage folks to try to jump on. Everyone's texting me about getting on. I'm like, please try to jump on. If you can't jump on here, they can actually watch the live stream on New York Post Cafe's Facebook page. And it actually says live on Facebook right now. And so, Tim, it was a bizarre year. So all of a sudden we got this massive debt from the theater production being shut down, you know, abruptly. And we have this at least $500,000 lawsuit against us by this lawyer out of Minnesota, Aaron Scott, and this big law firm, Fox Rothschild. And then on top of that, at the time, my ex-wife and I were living in a majority white neighborhood in Brooklyn Heights. And we had a lot of problems with the building. We were, you know, outside of ourselves, there were barely any black folks in the building except for the nannies who were taking care of all the white babies, you know, and the security team and obviously maintenance, the janitorial staff. And long story short, I got into it with the building management because they were harassing us about some stuff around rent being a little bit late, and the police were called. And I thought everything was done with the police when we talked about it. The super of the building talked to the police. I talked to the police.
So the police told you it was done at first, from what I recall in the story, right? I mean, they said, y'all just, if we take one of you in, we got to take both of you in. So why don't y'all just separate, go to your separate corners, and we're done.
Let me tell you, that's what I thought as well. Well, I also remember that night that the police came, I actually called the regional manager for the building, not going to say her name, but, you know, it was a white sister. And she acted like, you know, the woman who called the police on the black man in Central Park. Yeah. I was just a monster and I had to be dealt with, and the police are going to deal with it. And so the next day, what she or someone did that was connected to this situation actually called the police again and had me arrested. And I spent the night in jail. This is what happened to me. So this is all in 2018. We're being sued for defamation, you know, out of Minnesota of all places when we live in New York. Our theater production had crumbled. And now I'm in jail the same day. I was arrested on the same day that you and I were scheduled in September 2018 to do a public conversation at a institution in Manhattan, in New York City, about my previous book number 13. Right. And it was just ridiculous. It was absolutely ridiculous. I remember thinking to myself, Tim, man, I can't leave Tim hanging. And I was embarrassed to tell you what happened. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I knew something was wrong. And your wife at the time, ex-wife now, came and told me whatever she felt comfortable telling me. And you were very gracious about calling me the next day. I was getting ready to fly out. You sort of let me know what was going on. And I just remember at the time thinking that there was this story here, right, that was so much bigger than your life, right? This is metaphor for so much more, right? When you think about the the financial piece that you all were going through, when you think about the legal piece that you were going through, and when you see that, you know, the law firm, because as I read the story, right, you even mentioned in there, yeah, that judge was a Republican appointee, but even she, at one point, is like, why can't you just accept an apology? Talking about this Minnesota woman who was suing you. And the attorney would have none of it. You know, it was just, oh, no, an apology, you know, because y'all had acknowledged your mistake. You admitted that there was a mistake.
Right.
Weren't trying to destroy this person. In fact, you hadn't even
not who we are at
sent
all.
this letter to the Village Voice and the New York Times, and, you know, or even the Minneapolis newspaper. You sent it to a handful of people in the arts community and her, and you offered to apologize, publicly retract, but it wasn't enough. And I had to ask myself, with that story, with the story of what was going on in your building, and frankly, the story about the financial troubles that the choreo play ran into as well. If you had been a white man putting together this production, if you had been a white man in that building in Brooklyn Heights, like most of the other folks in that building being white, if you had been a white man who had made a mistake criticizing somebody who you thought was the one who had attacked your wife when it really turned out not to be, would it have played out differently? Now, we can't know for sure, obviously. And, but I think these are legitimate questions, because we've seen police called on black men over nothing, over and over and over again.
Exactly.
And we've seen black artists struggle to get their product seen and heard, no matter the quality of the product, in ways that we don't with even, frankly, second-rate white production, you know, of art. And we've seen white folks given second and third chances when they slander and when they libel. We have a president who slanders and libels people all the time.
Every single.
And escapes any kind of accountability for that. So it just seemed to me that all of that coming together was this statement, not just about what was collapsing in your life, but what is collapsing in our culture, right? And what's going on in a broader sense.
These are, I mean, it's really profound that you talk about it. I mean, you know, I would say that what happened to us contributed to the collapse of my marriage, you know, which is devastating, you know. You're absolutely right. It's interesting now as we see Black Lives Matter exploding around the country, and you see that Black professionals at different spaces, including the theater community in New York City, Black folks are saying, you know, we're sick and tired of the fact that there are hardly any Black folks who are in positions, or people of color, period, in positions to actually sign off on theater productions happening off Broadway, off Broadway, and Broadway. In fact, on Broadway, there's about 40 producing companies that permit shows to come to Broadway. Only one is Black run. Only one is Black run. And so you're absolutely right. You know, I remember vividly, number one, with the theater piece, we literally funded it ourselves. You remember we raised money. I'm sure you were one of the many people who donated to it. We were literally begging for money and getting support, but because we decided we had to go another route, because this whole notion of begging the power structure for us to be able to do a play, which is essentially about women of all backgrounds, you know, and how they challenge rape culture, sexism, patriarchy, was absolutely absurd, you know. I remember taking meetings with many theater managers, and it's like, that sounds great, but, you know, they weren't interested in it. And you're right. I've seen many mediocre plays. So that's number one. Number two, I never felt comfortable living in Brooklyn Heights, you know. And it's really funny now because of Black Lives Matter. When I skateboard, you can see my skateboards behind me. When I skateboard or walk or bike ride through Brooklyn Heights, there's Black Lives Matter signs in all these windows in Brooklyn Heights. I'm saying that's really interesting, considering when my ex-wife and I lived there, as she walked her two dogs, for example, she was often asked if she was a dog walker, if she was a nanny or something like that. You know, I didn't feel comfortable. I always actually felt, Tim, that sooner or later, I'm going to get arrested while I live in this neighborhood. That's what's going to happen. You know what I mean?
And you said that as somebody who had never been in jail before. I mean, but you're still sitting there thinking at the age of what, 50 at that time, right? That you're thinking, yeah, probably going to happen here, which says a lot, right?
I feel like we need to do something, because so many people are texting me saying that they cannot get into the Zoom event, which is problematic. 1 second, please.
Okay. We've got about 43 that are definitely in. The link's not working, or it is?
I just think that, you know, the problem is that when people signed up, they didn't get the link initially, but it's cool. We're going to make this work.
Do we have a link we can send them?
Uh,
Oh, wait, somebody just put in the chat, I had to remove the success part at the end to make it work. I don't know what that means, but
people are saying they're in now because an email was sent to them. But, to your point, if we can continue, it's everything that you said. I mean, my gosh. And then the whole situation with the, I said several times, it felt like Aaron Scott, the Minneapolis St. Paul lawyer who who's with Fox Rothschild, had a personal vendetta against me. The fact that he kept bringing up MTV's The Real World, which was in 1992, says to me that more than likely he was one of the many white males who watched this show and simply hated me because I talked about racism and maybe the way I talked to the white people on the show, maybe specifically how I talked to the white sisters on the show, not even realizing that all these years later, the 7 of us who were the original cast members of that show are actually all close friends. How could we not be? Because we have this common experience and we all have grown and evolved. But the problem with racism in this country, from the theater situation to the lawsuit to what happened with the Brooklyn Heights apartment building, is you are absolutely right. I feel like, every time I step out the door, and many black men feel the same way, and black women, that there's a target on our backs. There's a target on our backs. And for whatever reasons, Tim, all of it just kind of collided in 2018. And of course, you can imagine the great irony for me when I saw the video a couple months ago of George Floyd being kneed to death by the officer Derek Chavez, for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in Minneapolis, St. Paul, the same streets that my ex-wife and I had to walk in December 2018, when we were on trial. I want people to think about this. We were on trial for an email. We were on trial with a white woman Republican judge overseeing the whole situation. And the jury was all white except for one Asian sister.
Right.
Of course, we were like, they're going to find us guilty. They're going to say, you know what? Yep, you got to pay her. You got to pay her. And that's what happened.
Right.
And keep in mind, this lawyer was in such a hurry, Aaron Scott, to quote unquote prosecute this situation. He never bothered to do what most good lawyers do, which is, let me see if these people actually have any money.
Right.
So,
well, and here's the thing that's fascinating to me too, and speaks to the culture that we're in. So you mentioned early on, you get death threats, I get death threats. We get some of the most hateful, libelous, slanderous stuff any of us who do anti-racism work do. Anyone who does any kind of social justice work does. Women, of course, who do this work get it doubly, right? Because they're getting literal, threats of sexual assault and rape and just some of the most horrific stuff, even beyond what you and I get. When was the last time you got one of those emails and thought to yourself, oh, I bet I could successfully sue this person, or I could successfully have them prosecuted? And I ask it rhetorically because I know the answer, and we're both laughing at the absurdity. I mean, a year and a half ago, so 2018, your year was worse. I'll give you that. But at the end of 2018, we had several days where I was getting death threats from Nazis round the clock. Wow. And I don't just mean emails, I mean phone calls, because we got doxxed. So my wife's phone's blowing up, my phone's blowing up. And just to do my due diligence, I contacted some folks at the FBI, which I was very reticent about because I don't have a great relationship with law enforcement. And those of us who do this work don't have good relationships with law enforcement. But I happen to have one person at the FBI who I had known, who liked the work that I did, and said, hey, if you ever need anything, call this person. So I did.
Right.
And they were they couldn't do anything. And I'm saying these people were threatening my life, the lives of my children and my family.
Yeah.
I was up around the clock with security cameras. Every time there was a bump outside, I'm, losing my mind. And they couldn't do anything. They couldn't even tell us who these people were because they would mask their numbers with these apps. And if the FBI can't figure out who's sending you a death threat, that's pretty serious, right? Because these are the guys supposedly be able to crack all these serious cases. So why is it that they can't even help protect those of us who do this work? They can't protect women who were being stalked regularly by their former partners, husbands, boyfriends, whatever it might be. right? The cops will tell them every time, well, we have to wait until he does something, right? But you can send an errant email as a case of mistaken identity, innocent mistake, and then not even be allowed to give the opportunity to apologize before you're being asked to fork over $250,000. I mean, that's just fascinating.
It's capitalism. It's this was an incredible convergence of the massive greed of people in this society, this obsession with celebrity culture, this faulty perception that people like you and I, just because we might be on TV or podcast or radio or write books, quote unquote, have all this money. And you and I both know most writers barely make any money at all unless we sell the books directly ourselves when we're out there like speaking, hustling, etc. And so it was preposterous to me. It was insane what we went through, because it was just like, it was, in a lot of ways, it was foreshadowing what is happening in 2020. You know what I mean? The erosion of the whole society, because people realize there's something fundamentally wrong here. The stuff that Tim Wise has been talking about for years, the stuff that Kevin Powell's been talking about for years. You and I both know, Tim, there was a time when even calling ourselves activists, people would joke about it, and it was like a dirty word. And I will admit, even though I've been an activist since I was 18, over 30 years, there are times I would just say, well, I would use another word because I just think that people, thought there was something wrong with us when it really was not. The problem is the society, which we're finding out in the era of the pandemic, Donald Trump, and all these massive protests, that the problem is the value system of this country. That's what I kept thinking about during the lawsuit. I said, the irony of it all, the white sister that was suing us, April Sellers, is an artist and educator who has no money. And she's suing two black people who are artists and educators who have no money. And the white lawyer, the white male lawyer, the heterosexual white male lawyer, Aaron Scott from Fox Rothschild, saw this as his come up, as a way to make a name for himself, and probably in his own consciousness or subconsciousness, I'm going to get that Nigger, Kevin Powell, who I did not like on MTV's The Real World back in 1992, which is almost 30 years ago.
Oh, but by the way, he wanted you to know he was a Democrat, though, right, or something. Like he wanted you to know that he was like a liberal who didn't like Donald Trump or something.
Which also is back some things that you've written about, which it doesn't make a difference if you call yourself a liberal or a conservative. A racist is a racist if you practice racism.
Right.
You know what I mean? If you don't view black people and people of color as whole human beings, you are a racist, and that's what we dealt with. And it was utterly insane. And it was a waste of time. I believe that they spent at least $100,000, Tim, to pursue this case. And the sad part of it is out of all of it, they're never going to see a dime of the money because we don't have it. It doesn't even exist. You know what I'm saying? So there's no victory because there's no money. There absolutely is no money.
Well, in the wake of that though, and so this is the thing I want to get to. It's amazing to me that in spite of that year that you had, and that you write about very transparently and openly, as you have always tried to do in your writing, which is to be as open a book as possible. You nonetheless, on at least 7 or 8 occasions in the book, and I've seen it in some interviews you've done about the book as well, you find it possible, in spite of all that, to go back to the well of hope over and over and over again. You talk about in one of the pieces in the book, there's an essay to your unborn child, a sort of letter to an unborn child, in which you talk about the importance of that child, if you have that child someday, to not ever allow the reality of racism, which we've just been talking about and which has impacted your life.
Yeah.
The reality of racial oppression to ever make that child doubt that they are capable of great things and to lose hope. How in the midst of this collapsing private world does one maintain hope? And then what are the lessons that the rest of us can take away from these moments of crisis like we're in right now, where I think it's very easy for people facing the vulnerability of COVID-19, very easy for people facing the vulnerability of systemic racism, very, very easy for people facing the autocratic, authoritarian tendencies of this administration, to give up or to lose hope or to assume that all is lost. How do you maintain the hopefulness that infuses your writing, and how do you recommend that the rest of us do that?
Wow, that's a profound question. I'm going to be honest with you, man. These last 2 years from the stuff in 2018, the marriage collapsing last year, the divorce this year, all the stuff that we've seen happen, people I know personally who have died, some of them because of COVID, people who have lost everything because of COVID, watching these videos over again, which are traumatizing for people of color, of seeing, of hearing the stories, even of Breonna Taylor being killed, of George Floyd being killed. The list is endless of folks, whether they're videotaped or not. I've not cried in my entire life the way I've cried in the last 2 years. That's the honest to God truth. You know what I mean? It's been, I'd be lying to you if I didn't say that I didn't want to give up. There've been many times where I've wanted to give up. You better believe that. And people can read between the lines of what I mean, I absolutely wanted to give up, because how do you survive a marriage crumbling that fast? Because all the stuff that was happening, how do you survive the financial assault that affected me and I'm still dealing with? How do you survive? Not only were we sued and we lost the lawsuit in Minnesota, but the two daily papers in Minnesota, the Minnesota Star Tribune, the two major papers, I should say, and the City Pages wrote not one, but two hit pieces, and they were barely ever at the trial. And they just took the word of the lawyer and the white sister and just trashed us, just completely trashed us. And that led to all kinds of racist trolls. I mean, Tim, I was literally called a rapist, by folks who were attacking me after they read the articles in the Minnesota newspapers. I'm a pro-feminist man. I'm someone who speaks out often about redefining manhood. I'm someone who's very honest about my own journey as a man. And so it's a legitimate question. There've been times, honestly, where I've had no hope at all. It's like, this place is despicable and it hates Black people. That's what I felt in my bones. I have felt that. But what keeps me going and what has kept me going is my faith in God, which my mother instilled in me when I was a little child. You know what I mean? And when I say God, I'm not talking about some pie in the sky stuff about, we're going to get ours when we're in heaven. I'm talking about a deep faith that there is something better coming along, because I had no other choice, because my ancestors, African people, had to have that faith when they were kidnapped from Africa, put on those ships, brought across the Atlantic, dropped off all over the Americas, South America, Central America, the West Indies, America, the South. My family's from South Carolina. They had to have hope and faith. They had to have hope and faith as they were enslaved for a couple of centuries. They had hope and faith when they were being hung from trees during segregation. My mother and her two sisters had to have hope and faith when they boarded a Greyhound bus and migrated from the South to the North looking for a better life. And so how dare I not have any hope when his hope is the reason why I even exist? How dare I not have hope? How dare I not have faith? And I refuse, Tim Wise, and everyone listening, I refuse to become like my oppressor. I refuse to hate people. I refuse to be evil and toxic, to run around with bad karma, to be a bully, to be mean, to have my very value system be the same value system as the system that I say that I'm opposing. I refuse to be that person. It's not going to happen. I've been that person in my lifetime. I'm never going to be that person again. And I believe that the most revolutionary thing that we can actually do, and if it really did exist, we wouldn't have these problems, is love. Now, does that mean that I don't challenge oppression? You better believe I'm going to challenge oppression every single day of my life. Am I going to challenge racism every single day of my life? Absolutely. A racist is a racist is a racist. This system was founded on racism. The founding fathers were racist. We need to call it what it is. Francis Scott Key, who wrote the national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner, racist. He was born into a slaveholding family. He defended slavery. He got an abolitionist arrested. We need to call it what it is. This country needs a massive re-education, because it's destructive not just to people of color, but it's destructive to white people as well, because they also have been grossly miseducated about the true history of this country. And so I can't hate anybody because I understand the whole system. Just like you, I travel extensively. I've been to all 50 states. I've been in the major cities, small towns, rural areas. I've been in all kinds of places. And I realized at a certain point, Tim, everybody, whether they went to public schools or private schools, unless they had a parent or parents or went to a school that was different, pretty much the entire country has been grossly miseducated. about America.
Right. Well, in addition to that, one of the things you talk about in the book, speaking, sort of sticking with this theme of gross miseducation and the way in which we are raised and trained up in racism and internalization of white supremacy.
Yeah.
You also talk a lot in your work, not just in this book, but in your work more broadly over the years, about the way that men internalize toxicity in the way that we live our masculinities in this country.
Yeah.
One of the pieces in this book, which you describe as being one of the most wrenching, difficult pieces that you have ever had to write, is about Russell Simmons and the allegations by, I think, at least 20, if I'm remembering the number, 20 different women who have accused him of various forms of sexual misconduct, including rape. And you talk about discussing this with him on a couple of occasions and being pretty wholly unsatisfied with his understanding of even the concept of what rape is in the culture and under law and under ethical, moral sort of interpretations. Putting aside whether he's actually clear on his own actions, even his understanding of what the offense is. That's right. In a broader sense, seem to be off. And you do a really important job in the piece about talking about that as it relates to Russell Simmons as a symptom of a broader social and cultural problem, so that we don't get bogged down into, is it Harvey Weinstein? Is it, Woody Allen? Is it Russell Simmons? Is it Bill Cosby? It's not about these individuals so much as it is a culture that has led so many men, so many of us, to not understand what it means to be a healthy, respectful man, respectful of women, and to engage in a healthy form of living as a male, as opposed to this very toxic form. That's not to let these men off the hook by saying, oh, it's this social and cultural problem, but it is to try to locate the source of their damage and the damage that they bring out onto the bodies of others in a place other than just their own twisted psyche, because none of us act in isolation from the world in which we live, right? We're influenced by it for good and for bad. Talk a little bit about that piece and what you want people to know about that subject as it relates not just to Russell Simmons, but to the broader subject of manhood in America.
Well, first of all, I'm a very imperfect man. And I think that, what I have admired about white brothers and sisters, white people like yourself, is you take ownership, and I have a responsibility as well to take ownership for sexism, for misogyny, for patriarchy. And so I need to say that. Number two, I need to say that anything that I've evolved into and I'm still ever evolving actually comes from women. I'm very clear about that. Women with names like Bell Hooks, like Audre Lorde, like Nikki Giovanni, women like my mother, my Aunt Kathy, my Aunt Bertie, my late grandmother Lottie. I'm very clear that women like V, formerly Eve Ensler, women like Gloria Steinem have had an incredible impact on how I think. And just like white folks are miseducated about racism on this planet, not just in America, but on this planet, well, we as men, no matter what our background, we're miseducated about masculinity. And so we're taught that men are superior to women. Sounds familiar. Supremacy, male supremacy. We're taught that, it's okay if you're a man to be violent and aggressive and filled with ego, that men don't cry. The stuff that we say, boys don't cry, men don't cry. It's okay to be homophobic or transphobic and diss men who may be different, quote unquote, if they're quote unquote nerds and things like that. If they read books, God forbid, if they happen to like the arts, I remember growing up and being an athlete, Tim, and being ashamed of the fact that I love to read, and I would purposely act out so I wouldn't appear to be too smart, because that's not what boys did. And I certainly didn't say that I had certain kinds of feelings, like how dare I say, how much I love Shakespeare and I loved the sonnets and stuff like that, because that wasn't things that boys did. And so toxic manhood is a system, just like racism, white supremacy. And racism, white supremacy, we're really saying the same thing. So for folks who don't understand the definitions, toxic manhood is a system. Patriarchy, misogyny, it's a system. And I think that when I wrote the Russell Simmons piece, I knew there were problems because I've worked in the music industry. And, while I certainly have had my own issues as a man, one thing I'm proud of, I never engaged in any kind of stuff that I've heard stories about. A lot of it I didn't even know about. When I was documenting when I was at Vibe magazine in the 1990s, I was always in a relationship, number one. Number two, I very rarely I was never in those spaces where there's these kind of crazy behaviors going on that Russell described. And I've heard, described about Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby and other people. I basically did my work and I kept it moving, you know what I'm saying? And so years later, even my own cousin who has worked in the music industry for a long time has shared with me how uncomfortable all the women that she knows, including herself, feel or have felt in these kind of spaces that are male dominated. And they're not just talking about the entertainment industry, journalism, across the board. And so, it was a difficult piece because I was hoping that there was a true awakening here. The problem with Russell Simmons and a lot of men, either they blame the women for their behavior. They blame somehow. It always comes back to assassinating the character of the women who bring up the issues. Number two, and that's like the male playbook. That's what it's called, the male playbook. Weinstein has done it. Other folks have done it. Cosby's done it. Russell's done it. Number two, Russell Simmons, who is a hero to many people in the community, hip hop community, in the industry in general, thought that he could make a leap from who he was then, or who he was being accused of, to being this yoga, Zen-loving person without doing any work in the middle, without taking any ownership. You can't do that. You have to acknowledge that you have participated in oppression. White people, men, straight folks versus the LGBTQ plus community, able-bodied people versus the disabled community, people who practice ageism, people who practice classism. We just can go right down a list. If you have any kind of privilege, you've participated, and you've not challenged that privilege, you've participated in the oppression of the people who are the victims of your privilege. That's basic. And so it certainly applies to us as men. And just like we're not educated about racism, what did I learn about women K through 12? Betsy Ross sewed a flag. Some woman named Florence Nightingale was a nurse, knew nothing else about her. Helen Keller, she was blind and deaf. Had no idea that Helen Keller was a major social justice activist. Had no idea. Or that Eleanor Roosevelt was. You feel what I'm saying? None of that stuff. Rosa Parks refused to give her seat. And that was the totality of my education, K through 12. And I was a straight A student, K through 12. And I get 4 or 5 women in history, social studies, math, science, literature, nothing about the contributions of women and girls to America or the planet. That's why rape culture exists. That's why sexism exists. That's why pay inequities exist. That's why women feel uncomfortable going out at certain times of the day because they don't know if they're going to be attacked by men. That's why women feel uncomfortable jogging, running, doing things that men have the privilege of doing that we don't even think about. We just take for granted. That's why women feel threatened in so many different types of spaces. Yeah. Sexism. And so as Evans, or V, as she calls herself now, and other women have said, Bell Hooks has said it as well, this will not end until men and boys make it end. It's not the responsibility of women and girls to end sexism. It's the responsibility of men and boys to end sexism. Just like it's not the responsibility of people of color, Black people and other people of color to end racism in this country. White folks have got to step up and say, we've got to end this. We've got to change this. We've got to step back. We got to do what Serena Williams' husband has done and said, you know what? I want myself to be replaced as a white man by a Black CEO. We've got to do what Jon Stewart did when he left The Daily Show. I'm going to make sure that a Black man, Trevor Noah, gets this position. I'm going to step back and say, you know what? Enough of me being privileged. Let this Black person do it. The same thing applies to sexism. Yeah. Everything that I do, including projects that I'm working on, I make sure, Tim, that women are there as equal partners in leadership roles. I have a responsibility not to show up at work, any space, and it's 99% men and there's one woman there in 2020. That's absolutely insane. Right. And so that's what real solidarity means around race, around gender, all of it. Do you show up consistently and challenge the injustice that is happening?
Yeah. And let's think a little bit about this with regard to rape culture and sexual assault, because there's two things going on right now at once in our society. There's more than that, but 2 things that sort of stand out, right? In the last several years, of course, with the Me Too movement and this sort of clear awakening on the part of a lot of people. And again, we can talk about how sad it is that it has only now become an awakening for some, but whenever you get the memo, welcome to the struggle. It's all right. Would have been nice to have you there all along, but it's better late than never. So you have this blossoming of awareness of male sexual predation, and calls for accountability, whether we're talking about Russell, whether we're talking about Harvey Weinstein, whether we're talking about Roman Polanski, whoever it is we're talking about.
Right.
And at the same time, right now in the midst of this racial justice uprising, there's a lot of conversation about entirely different models of accountability in criminal justice. We're talking about depolicing all of a sudden, which, you know, some of us have talked about that for years, but it never really sort of caught on in the mainstream of discussion. We're talking about prison abolition that now has gone from the margins to the center of the conversation. Even for people who aren't there yet, they're talking about it. So how do we blend these two needs, right? Number one, accountability for people who are sexually violent, like some of the people that we're referring to who are either alleged of having committed sexual assault or we know for a fact have and have been adjudicated guilty on that. How do we get accountability and at the same time try to move away from a carceral state that looks at accountability as throw away the key, lock somebody up, there's no redemption, there's no, you know, there's no restoration? How do we actually move to restorative justice on these difficult cases? Like, it's easy to think of restorative justice if I like steal your bicycle, right? Or if I vandalize your house, or if I spray paint a hateful word on a wall outside your home or on the sidewalk. You can easily think of those cases because those are not life or death violent instances in most cases. But when we talk about sexual violence, when we talk about that kind of thing, which is such a horrific
experience, or racist violence.
Absolutely. When we talk about rape, when we talk about sexual assault of any kind, when we talk about those cases, that's where people, you know, get a little bit like, I don't know if I'm ready to get rid of prisons exactly, you know, or I'm not sure if we don't need some police. And I'm not saying that this is not my position that I'm taking. I'm saying this is, you know, you hear this. So how do we balance the need for accountability with the need for restorative justice in cases like that?
Well, you know, it's a great question. I can't sit here and say to you, if something happened to any woman in my life that I'm connected to sexually, sexual violence, that I would not want the person to be in jail. I would. I absolutely would. Period. You know, and we know that most of this is what we're talking about is men assaulting, violating women and girls. That's what it is. Right. But I also know that just like people are taught to be racist, people are taught to be sexist. It's a conditioning that goes on, which is why you see a lot of conversations happening now that we've got to reach our boys. We've got to reach the boys. We've got to reach the boys, because people realize much of this behavior begins very early. I talk about in my autobiography, The Education of Kevin Powell, how, you know, by the time I was in the 3rd or 4th grade, a couple of dynamics were at work. First of all, the men in the community that I was in, which is most men in most communities, no matter where they are already saying to the boys that you need to go get you some. In other words, we're already objectifying women and girls as just body parts, that we need to go have sexual conquests. We're also being told or encouraged, and you know, we're policing each other as males, as boys in school, go grab a girl's body part. You know, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. I'm sure the women on this thread right now know exactly what I'm talking about. That's called sexual assault. That's called sexual assault. You grabbing a girl's body part, a boy grabbing a girl's body part, a man grabbing a woman's body part, that actually is sexual assault. But no one said anything. The teachers didn't say anything. The police didn't say anything. No one said anything. It's just boys will be boys. And so there was this kind of whole enabling of this behavior. And I'm not saying that all of us grew up to become rapists. I certainly did not. You know what I mean? But what we do grow up becoming is sexist. And really few of us actually believe that women and girls are equals. And again, if you go back to how we're educated, not just the school system, the mass media culture, the images of women and girls in film, TV, books, magazines, on the internet, we can go across the board. Why would the average boy or man view a woman or girl as his equal if the images that he sees over and over again are not of women and girls as his equal? Right. We're seeing the sexualization, the hypersexualization over and over again of women and girls. And so that inevitably leads to this toxic behavior, which includes rape culture, you know, and I'm not making any excuses for it, but I do think that's the context of it. And I know that feminists agree with me, people like V, formerly Eve Ensler, and Bell Hooks, that the problem is the whole way that we have been taught masculinity, manhood. That's the problem. That is the fundamental problem. And it's not only destructive to women and girls, but it's also destructive to men and boys, because most of us have no clue what a man or boy is. Let me just say this real quick, Tim. One of the workshops that I do all around the country is called What is a Man? I ask 2 simple questions. It's been in corporate America. I've done it with athletes on college campuses. I've done it at high schools. I've even done it at grade schools. What's a man? I get the same answers usually everywhere I go. Responsible, takes care of the family, accountable, works hard, etc. They go down this whole list. When they're done, I say, you just told me what my mother is. Now can you tell me what a man is? Right. Silence. Second question I ask, no matter what the backgrounds, no matter what the space, can you name me 5 women in American history who have contributed to American history that are not named Hillary Clinton or Michelle Obama or Beyonce or Cardi B, someone like that?
Right.
Silence.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Most of us have no clue about even the women in our families. We have no clue. And so why does sexual assault exist? Why does rape culture exist? Woeful, horrific ignorance. And it's almost like most of us men and boys are acting out the scripts that we were given, some to the extreme, you know, become sexual predators, we become rapists, we become accused of being sexual predators, like a Weinstein, like a Bill Cosby, like a Russell Simmons, like a Woody Allen, those types of folks. But many of us are also participating simply by being silent. And even if you don't say, even if you're not the kind of man that does any of the kind of stuff that we're talking about, calling women out of their names, touching them without permission, raping them, killing them, but you know people around you who say it in the barbershop, in the synagogue, in the church, the masjid, in the locker room, any space, and you say nothing about it, as a man, you become just as guilty. It's basic.
Right. Right. Well, and we know that when we think about how we're going to get at the heart of that toxicity, that culture, we know the carceral state's not going to do it. I mean, I'm like you know, if someone were to hurt any of my family, your instinct, right? It just instinctual is to want that person to be punished or to even punish them yourself. I mean, you know, it's like, I've always been opposed to capital punishment, but I've also been honest enough to say that if someone were to try to harm me or my family, I would not think twice about killing them. Right? I would not do it joyfully, but I would do it, even though I would not want the state to do it on my behalf. But what I know is when it comes to toxic masculinity, and we think about predators, sexual predators, and those who engage in sexualized violence against women disproportionately, also sometimes against other men. The idea that locking them in a cage for 23 hours a day in many cases is going to somehow change the toxicity or lessen it is absurd, because there's really no institution on the planet that is more of a hothouse of toxic masculinity than the prison system. Because if you come into that system and are not prepared to fight on the drop of a dime, like anything, you'll be eaten alive in there, because you have wardens and guards who benefit from keeping inmates fighting one another. Right. Because that keeps the guards in control. So they want the black inmates and the white inmates and the Latinx inmates to fight one another as a way to keep them divided so that nobody comes after them. Right. So it's a horribly toxic, overly aggressive environment, which means sending people who are suffering from toxic masculinity and then bringing that damage out onto the lives and bodies of women, putting them in a cage is not going to solve the problem. When they come back out, as the vast majority will, they're going to bring that toxicity back in even greater form, right?
It begs a question, because what does, you know, whether it's racial violence against black people and other people of color, or sexual violence against women and girls, what does justice look like? You know, what does it look like? And no one's been able to answer that question. You know, it is unacceptable as a human being. Let's just say human being for a second. You know, no matter what our race, gender identity, class, etc., it is unacceptable, in my opinion, at this stage of my life, you know, for us to think it's okay to not even have any kind of question that that there's something wrong with being violent against someone else. You know, it's why is that okay? And why is it okay for people to continually get away with it? Why is it okay for women to be afraid to go to the police because they don't think anything's going to happen to the person who assaulted them, who sexually violated them? Why is it okay for black folks to go through every situation and expect the police to get off, or the racist vigilante to get off, because there's no history of racial justice in this country for the most part? There's no history of sexual justice in this country for the most part, which says to me that it's not going to come from the leadership that we have. It's going to have to come from we the people. What does justice look like? What does restorative justice look like? Can people actually be redeemed? You know, it can be argued that Malcolm X, one of my heroes, is an example of restorative justice. But there was an organization that was outside of the power structure, outside of the political process, called the Nation of Islam, at least during that time, that was able to give him a pipeline to a different way of living. And we know he was able to evolve because of that. You know, but the reality is, Tim, that doesn't really exist for most people in this country. We stumble into stuff. You know, I stumble. It was women from Spelman College, the great HBCU out of Atlanta, Georgia, the great historically Black college university, and other women, other Black women mostly, who challenged me in the early 1990s around my sexism. You've got to read this. You've got to read Pearl Cleave. You've got to read Bell Hooks. You need to know who Audre Lorde is. And I was resistant to it because, like most men, I'm like, or anybody who is benefiting from whatever privilege they have, if you change who you are, that means you got to give up something. Not that you have to give up something, you have to look at the world in a totally different way than you've been educated your entire life. But we do have examples of that. That Malcolm X, Bobby Kennedy. You know what I mean? It's not like Bobby Kennedy was some progressive most of his life. Right. A traumatic experience happened to him. His brother John was killed. Bobby began to change as a white man, as a heterosexual white man, as a wealthy, privileged white man, and began to listen differently to people of color. He wasn't the same white person who, when he was sat down by Lorraine Hansberry and James Baldwin and other artists, maybe a year or two before his brother was killed, and he was difficult to deal with and act like they were tripping as they were talking about racism. But because of the traumatic experience he went through, there was a transformation. There was a transformation for Malcolm. And so when I think about justice and restorative justice and what's going to change this, there has to be serious transformations of people, be it some sort of, how do you put it? There has to be transformations of people. And the way that the system is set up now, there's no space for Harvey Weinstein to be redeemed. There's no space for a Bill Cosby to be redeemed. They may be in jail, but they're going to be the same people until they die. There's nothing there telling them they even have to rethink manhood. They're just simply being put in jail because the system has caught up with them, because the world has caught up with them saying, you're going to go to jail, and so you're now a pariah. But what about all the men who are never caught? What about all the men who never go to jail, who are just out there? What's in place to actually transform them from being predators or sexual assaulters or just sexists to being men who understand that women and girls are the equals of men and boys. Women and girls are the equals of men and boys if we're talking about the binary. But even beyond that, it's not okay to hurt women and girls who are heterosexual, who are queer, who are lesbian, who are bisexual, who are transgender. None of that is acceptable. And who's doing that? Most of those things that we're talking about are happening from men who are heterosexual, who are confused about manhood and lash out at anything that threatens their definition of manhood.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it takes me back to what you said earlier about the sort of revolutionary nature of love. And we think of that as an outward facing thing. So we think of it as, you know, love your enemies, even as they curse you. We think of it as, you know, love your, not love your oppressor, but see their humanity in a way that you will not become them, right? As you alluded to. Right. But really that starts internally, right? Because if you aren't capable of really loving whatever the wounded you is, that then allows you to wound other people, you're going to continue to wound them. I mean, you come back to this phrase over and over in the book that hurt people, which Russell actually also says to you in your conversations. And it's a well-known aphorism that anyone who's done therapy, I've done therapy, you've done therapy, you know, all God's children need some therapy. And if you get some, you will learn that all hurt people, because it's one of those things that we're taught very early on in the process if we have a good therapist. And when you're in therapy, right, one of the things you learn is you have to love that part of yourself that was hurt that you haven't learned to love yet.
That's right.
Or you will inevitably find ways to work out your damage on other people. And one of the pieces in the book that got to me in that regard, Kevin, was, so you have the letter to your unborn child that sort of starts the book. Then you have another letter to a 9-year-old friend of yours who you're writing about in the midst of COVID.
Yeah.
And trying to sort of, it's sort of a calming letter. It's an attempt to, as I read it, to say, yeah, this is really scary. And you reflect back on some of the things when you were a child that age that were frightening, Vietnam and other things like that. And and in the letter to this child and your unborn child, one of the things that I sensed and that I picked up, and I could be grasping at straws as I read it. You know, people, you can never control how other people read your work. But as I'm reading your words to children, your unborn child, hypothetical unborn child, and this 9-year-old that you're writing to, in some way, and in both of those pieces, trying to get them to maintain hope and hopefulness in the face of real tragedy and trauma. It seemed like those pieces come from a part of you that wishes that someone, perhaps your father, who I know you did not have a relationship with, had written you a letter like this, letting you know that it was going to be okay. And I know that I wish that I'd had that from my father, didn't have that from him either. Sometimes when I write things to my daughters or when I write things about my daughters, I feel like I'm writing as much to my teenage self as I am to them. How much of that was in play here? Does that make any sense at all to you, what I'm saying?
Well, you know, it's interesting. That's a great question too, brother. I'm loving this conversation. I want to thank, I've been looking around between the text messages and the chats. I just want to say thank you all. I see you all, and Tim and I are so appreciative because the people are really vibing and asking questions. I would like to answer some of them.
We will get to them, yes.
I still would like to be a father, even at my age. I mean, I figure if George Clooney could do it at 55, why can't I do it? He's got twins. And I think that George Clooney is a good man, you know, and has become a good man in a lot of ways because of his experiences and taking ownership for stuff. And I think he's evolved. He's an example of someone I think about who's evolved in a lot of ways. Part of me is afraid of bringing a child into this world. I think part of me was always afraid of being like the father that wasn't there, the abandonment, the huge sense of abandonment that I experienced. My mother and my father were never married, as some of you all know. I only saw him 2 or 3 times until I was 8 years old. And then one day my mother called to ask for help, and he just said, "You lied to me. He's not my son. I'm not going to give you a nickel, a near nickel from ever again." Never saw him again. Never heard from him again. And it was devastating, you know. And, you know, probably one of the most frightening things for me, Tim, coming up, you know, by the time I got to my 20s and being on MTV, being at Vibe magazine, having this so-called high profile very young, is that people were looking up to me and I was not ready to be nobody's mentor. I can tell you that for a fact. Sure. It's a huge responsibility. I know you know what I'm talking about because you're still processing, wait a minute, you want me to be your father figure, your mentor. I need a daddy. I ain't got no daddy. You know what I'm saying? And it's taken me, I'm good now with it. I love younger people. I mean, I just spent today directing several commercials around COVID and violence prevention for the mayor's office here in New York. It was all folks between 18 and 29. It was an amazing experience. But I wrote those 2 letters because I feel like we do have a responsibility as quote unquote men to show up, to be present, you know, to not be typically absent. And I've noticed this. I used to think that it was only Black men or men of color. I can't tell you how many young white brothers have said to me that they look to me for examples, you know, and I'm sure you get the same thing. So it says that because even if the father's there, something that Bell Hooks always says, what does it matter if the father's physically there if they're not emotionally available? You know, because it's back to that manhood box that a lot of us are in, and these definitions of manhood we got where we're told that the father just provides and they don't communicate. So I've met a lot of men of all backgrounds where they had fathers and the fathers don't talk because they were conditioned to just not talk about certain things, you know, which is painful. So for me, writing the letters is also a way of saying that, hey, we as men, as males, quote unquote, as men, have to communicate. We have to say what we feel and not care if people make all kinds of judgments about us. If they say ridiculous stuff or you know, I've had people say to me, you know, Kevin, you know, you're just not the same person you used to be. I'm like, well, do you want me to not grow, not to evolve? You know what I'm saying? You know, I happen to like yoga. It has helped me to evolve. I happen to like being a vegan. It's helped me to evolve. I happen to like meditating and praying every day. It has helped me to evolve so I can actually be a multidimensional or try to be a multidimensional man as opposed to a stick figure that the society wants me to be. That's what I think about. Yeah.
Well, let's, I got a few more things and I'll come back to them, but I want to jump over to the Q&A so you can get on to some of these. And I'll just take, I'll take them in order, just to be, to honor the way that folks got in on this real quickly. So the first one we have, question is, how do we break the stranglehold? This goes back to the education piece. How do we break the stranglehold that the oppressor keeps on the school curriculum?
I think that we have to be involved. I'm going to keep it real with y'all. I live in New York City. I can't speak for any other part of our country. And, I'm talking about America specifically. That's what I know best. I have been to so many meetings, community meetings that talk about the school system. Very few of us show up. And I get it. A lot of us are busy. A lot of us are raising our own families. We got a lot of stuff going on. Some of us are just barely making it check to check. But I'm going to say this. My mother had an 8th grade education. My mother had an 8th grade education. But she showed up at school all the time. She's the reason why I'm a writer, why I have 14 books, why I have the work ethic that I have. And she was an advocate for her son. She was like, there's no way I'm going to allow this school or this school system or this principal or this teacher to marginalize my son. That's my mother. They wanted to put me in special education because of behavioral problems. They didn't care about the grades I was getting, which were exceptional. They're like, well, we can't control him because they didn't know how to relate to a Black boy. I think that those of us who are woke, we need to show up in that way and make sure that our kids are not only being treated respectfully and that the education is actually benefiting them, interactive, but we do need to question everything. I mean, Tim, you and I know, if all we're learning K through 12 is that America had a lot of wars, you've been grossly miseducated.
Right.
And if you don't know what those wars, quote unquote, were about, you've been grossly miseducated. If you just believe that Columbus discovered America, you still believe that, you've been grossly miseducated. Why is that still a part of the curriculum without also talking about the genocide of Native American people, of indigenous people, without talking about the kidnapping of Africans from Africa and how it built the economic infrastructure of this country and really of this planet,
Right.
And so any curriculum that's not honest, that's not dealing, as someone said in the chat, around truth and reconciliation, to me is educational malpractice at this point in time. Because when I see these folks who are vigilantes rolling up in the governor of Michigan's office, when I see people refusing to wear masks, because they're like, it's all the COVID thing is a hoax, I'm saying they are a product of the gross miseducation system in America.
Right.
That's
Well,
what
let me give you just a quick visual, because as I was listening to your answer, and I was looking, I have my computer up on a stack of books to sort of get some height, and have the angle be better. I've learned that over the years. And I realized that the book right under my computer, just to give you an idea of how bad the curriculum is and what we're taught. So this right here, I have this book from my childhood. This is the first book that I ever read on my own. Meet Andrew Jackson, right?
Woo.
Now this is a child's book. It was written in 1967. I would have read it around 1971. And it's a book that you can imagine how it handles indigenous removal, how it handles a Trail of Tears. Basically, there's a section in there where it says that Andrew Jackson's mother, when she left to go help some people that had cholera or something, she told them, never take anything that isn't yours and never tell a lie. And of course, Andrew Jackson then proceeded to take Black folks that were not his as enslaved property, take land that belonged to indigenous people, steal from them, lie about it. And I realized that even though this was in the early 1970s when I was reading this, you go and you look at what young people learn about Andrew Jackson, George Washington, et cetera, hasn't really changed. We still teach children that cherry tree story, right? That George Washington was so damn honest that he couldn't tell a lie, chopped down a tree and said, Daddy, I did it. And I can't lie, I did it. And that's a lie, right? I mean, it just never happened. It's not even a real story, but it's a story that we tell as a way to create an almost godlike aura for our founders. Like they're just so intrinsically wonderful that we have to create this pedestal for them, right? And then we don't understand why we're having these debates about statuary and why we're having these debates about who deserves to be in a place of honor. And at least if they're going to be there, can we tell the truth about them and the whole truth, not just a partial truth? And people lose their minds precisely because they were raised on a steady diet of this right here. If you're raised on a steady diet of this right here, you won't understand why people are offended by, Lee Circle in New Orleans when Robert E. Lee used to be there, or Jackson Square in New Orleans where I went to school, which is still there. So we have to do something. I would only add one more word of advice for the questioner about breaking the stranglehold of that. Look to the example that some of these young people have set around the country who have challenged this curriculum that they're exposed to. I think of the young folks out in Tucson, Arizona, who the course of the last 15 years fought a huge battle with a program that was created, Mexican American Studies, La Raza Studies program that was created about 15 years ago in the Tucson Unified School District, voluntary program. You didn't have to be Chicanx student to take the class. Anybody could take the La Raza Studies program. It was mostly Chicanx students who did, but it wasn't mandatory and anybody could do it. And basically it was teaching all the subject matter through the lens of the Chicanx experience, right? So literature, science, math, all of it taught through that lens. You weren't just learning Chicanx stuff, but you were learning about other stuff through a Chicanx frame, right?
That's right.
And what was amazing about this program was after several years of it, they did a study where because the state tried to get rid of it, did get rid of it, actually stepped in and said, this is a awful program. It's teaching hatred for white people. It's teaching hatred for America just because it's telling the truth about the Chicanx experience. And so that's supposedly teaching hatred and hostility. Right. So the state shuts the program down. They go to court. Ultimately, the school district won the lawsuit and that decision to get rid of the program was overturned. But one of the pieces of evidence that the district put into the record was there was a study that found that the kids who went through that program, and it was, like I said, voluntary. So it was like 1,400 high school kids that went through the program in a couple of years. Those 1,400 kids who were demographically just like the other kids in the neighborhood, mostly brown kids, mostly from working class and middle class communities. So the demographics the same, family background dynamics the same, but the ones that went through the program, something like 70% went on to college. The ones that were just like them who didn't go through that program, who did the traditional program, only 17% were going to college. So we know that the program worked. And I'm telling you, that's why the state shut it down. That's because it was working, not because it was failing, because it was working. It was uplifting marginalized people. But that's an example of what we can do. And you know what happened when the state shut it down? To the questioner's question, to the point that the questioner's asking, when the state shut it down, those brown families in Tucson, those Latinx families, they didn't sit around saying, well, gosh, we really hope that the Tucson Unified School District can bring back, Mexican American Studies. They taught their own children that material. They made sure that their children were going to get that material. If they had to get it at church, if they had to get it in I don't guess they have basements in Tucson. I don't know if you can have a basement in Tucson, but you know what I mean? Like the community center, the Boys and Girls Club, whatever it is, we're going to have the class. We're going to teach the material. We're going to make sure that our children have. So I think it's important that even though we're trying to change the curriculum in the system, we cannot rely on the schools to educate our children about truth. We have to do that. I
agree. And if I can add one quick thing to it, because I love these questions that are coming in, the first 18 years of my life, you're talking about the stranglehold that the oppressor keeps on the school curriculum. I was a self-hating Black person because I was a straight A student, K through 12. I mastered all the stuff. That book that Tim just held up about Andrew Jackson, I worshiped Jackson, Jefferson, Lincoln, Washington, Columbus, all of those folks, because I didn't see myself anywhere in the curriculum, because the problem with the curriculum is that it centers whiteness. It centers whiteness. And even that's dangerous to white people, because I always ask white brothers and sisters, white people, well, what were you before you became white? Because we know that part of the history of this country was to erase any idea of where you came from. Let's not talk about being Irish or Italian or Jewish or Polish or German. Let's forget that. We're just going to make you white. And I mean, that's destructive, to not just to Black people and people of color, but it's destructive to white folks. And so when you talk about that, I literally had to take responsibility for my own education. I was a horrible student in college. I didn't even finish college, Rutgers University, but I was exceptional at reteaching myself history. Once I was given Malcolm X's autobiography at age 18 and The Last Poets and some other stuff, the fire went up. And I spent the 4 years that I was at Rutgers University in the E185 section of the library, which is where all the Black history books were, because I realized, as Toni Morrison said, I have to stop centering whiteness. I need to center myself. That doesn't mean that I hated white people or that I hate white people. Actually, my love of all people came from my love of myself, first and foremost. My education should be a form of self-love. It should be a form of healing and empowerment, not making you worship someone that you're not. That doesn't make any sense. And Tim is right. My mother, unfortunately, she did the best that she could. It's not like we had books in the house. It was not like I have books to my left or Tim has books behind them. But, if you are a parent who is at least somewhat woke, you cannot, as Tim said, leave the education of your child completely to the school system. They need to know their history, no matter who they are, starting at home. They need to be encouraged and supported from home. And you also have to fight that fight because our taxpayer dollars pay for the public school system. You do need to fight that fight as well.
Absolutely. The second question we have here is, what are some of the different challenges during the BLM movement at this point for Black folks who live in primarily white demographic areas? So like Brooklyn Heights, where you were.
I moved back to Fort Greene.
I know. But it's a great question. What are the challenges for Black folks who are, because I can imagine, I mean, it's not clear from the question, but I could imagine that, I mean, there are the obvious challenges of trying to be seen as a full human being in white spaces, but there's also that challenge of having white folks go out of their way to show how woke they are now, right, in that kind of space. And that, I remember the day after the Obama election in 2008, I was flying through the Detroit airport. I remember seeing white people go up to Black folks who they did not know and just hug them. For no damn reason, just hug them, like as if to say that Barack Obama was not only the senator from Illinois, but was also the best friend of Denise, the gate agent at A16. Denise doesn't know Barack Obama, but this white woman's like, "Oh, I'm so happy," and Denise is like, "What?" So right, so there's that challenge too. Like, how do you deal with the invisibility or the hyper visibility, which sometimes results in the kind of treatment that Ahmaud Arbery received on the street in Georgia, or also the kind of like over the top smiley face, oh my gosh, let me put my Black Lives Matter sign out, which is not real helpful either necessarily. So that's a great question that Gabby is asking. What do you say to that?
I can only speak for myself on this part of it. I will never again live in my lifetime in a majority white neighborhood. From age 13 to 18, in Jersey City, New Jersey, where I was born and raised, I lived in a majority white neighborhood. Never will do that again. Then I went to Rutgers University, a majority white neighborhood for 4 long years. And so I literally spent 9 years of my life in a majority white neighborhood, being told things like, you don't speak like the rest of them. You don't act like the rest of them. When I was, growing up in that neighborhood as a kid, you're different than the rest of them. You're like the mascot, et cetera. And then I get to Rutgers University. One of my first experiences at Rutgers was me and a friend, standing at a bus stop. It was loaded with all kinds of college students. We happened to be the two Black boys standing at the bus stop. The campus police, they call them public safety at schools, y'all, stopped and asked us out of all the folks for our ID. And I was like, okay, this is what it's going to be. And so fast forward from that experience to being arrested and put in jail for a night by the Brooklyn Heights folks, majority white neighborhood in Brooklyn. I personally will not live in a majority white community for the rest of my life because I don't feel that racism in this country is going to end during my lifetime. I don't believe that. It's not going to happen. And I feel like I am not going to put myself in spaces where my life is instantly threatened because of where I live. I can't do that. Now, am I threatened, of course, living in New York City, period? Yeah. But I feel like, I feel a certain kind of way. When I'm in Detroit or Atlanta or parts of DC or, PG County or Baltimore or the West Indies or Africa, or Brixton and London or parts of Toronto, I don't feel what I feel in places like Brooklyn Heights, where someone's going to call the police on me simply because I'm a Black person. But let me say this. I understand why people of color have the right to live anywhere they want to live. We have the right to go to any school we want to go to. We have the right to work in any space we want to work in. If you happen to live in a majority white community, if you happen to go to a majority white school, if you happen to work in a space where you're one of the only people of color in that space, I strongly recommend that you set up, even if via social media, via the internet, support groups so that you at least have people around you, at least online, where you can exchange strategies. How do I navigate this majority white neighborhood? How do I navigate this majority white workspace? How do I navigate this school, which is in the middle of nowhere? I'm going there because they gave me all this money to get a PhD. How do I navigate this stuff? Because if you don't do that, then you become isolated. And I do believe that you set yourself up for all kinds of attacks, and you actually will be the victims of all kinds of attacks, and you won't have the tools to navigate that space that you're in. And I think that's dangerous for us, because I think that living in this society sadly still is very dangerous for people of color. And let me add this one part to it. For white folks out there who are either listening to us live right now or who are going to listen to the recording of this, I'm going to say it over and over again. I love all people. I love all people. And I also love my African self. It's not an either or, it's both. I love all humanity, the entire human race, but I also love and proud to be an African. By saying that, I also say that if you're serious, white folks out there, don't just put Black Lives Matter signs in your windows, in your cars, in the storefronts of the windows of your stores. Don't just post stuff on social media. What we need you to do, if you're serious, is do what Tim Wise does, what V, formerly known as Eve Linzer, has done and is doing, and other progressive, really progressive, not fake progressive, real progressive white folks have done. Show up consistently and fight white supremacy. Show up consistently and fight racism. Speak out. Even if it means that you're going to be marginalized in some ways, you have to challenge it. You have to do the work on a consistent basis, and not just around people of color, but you have to do it with your family, with your mother, your father, your brothers, your sisters, your uncles, your grandparents, the people you went to grade school with, high school with, college with, the people that you served in the military with, the people that you work with. You have to challenge it every single day of your lives. I'm a heterosexual Black man. Let me say that again. I'm a heterosexual Black man, but I challenge homophobia, transphobia every chance I get. I challenge sexism every chance I get. I don't just take for granted, you know, it's not just about me and my space. I'm like, I have to challenge oppression in all forms. And that's what white folks have to do around racism. And that means that you even have to question what they call that subconscious bias thing. Like if you are hiring people and forget all of that. Go to your Facebook page. If most of your friends are white.
Yeah. You know, some of your answer actually speaks to a question that's a couple down, but I want to jump to it and I'll come back to the one before it. But Stuart asked a question. Many people are wading into or wanting into the discussion on race who haven't been present before. How do we encourage people to do the work that you're talking about, Kevin, but to move beyond simply watching 13th, Tim Wise's work, TED Talks, reading anti-racist, anti-discrimination books? Is it possible in today's society for people to publicly make mistakes in this work? That last piece I think is real critical because, you know, you've even this evening spoken to the fact that the way that you tried to break down racism to your housemates on that first season of Real World is not the way you would go about doing that today, even though you were trying to make a point that you would no doubt still want to make today. And I'm particularly thinking about the interaction with Julie on the street, because I can remember this, even though it's 30 years ago. I remember it very clearly, but I don't feel about it the way that the attorney in Minnesota apparently did. I feel differently, but so that's an example of, if not a mistake, maybe an imperfect way of having done the work. We've all done that. We've all said things. You know, social media, I think, is primed to bring out the absolute worst in us, frankly, much more than the best, right? Because you can only be so poetic and so profound in 280 characters on Twitter or whatever the case might be, on Facebook with so many words. So how do we create enough space for people to do the work, as you put it, beyond, as Stuart mentioned, the various things, reading certain books, watching certain films, and also know that people are going to make mistakes? How do we create space for people to screw up and nonetheless be part of this struggle, even when they make the mistakes that we all know inevitably they're going to make?
I want to answer that, but to Stuart and some other folks out there, I want to make it clear, I do realize I even live in a privileged space by living in a place like New York City, which is incredibly diverse. I'm very clear about that. I hope you all heard my answer where I said that even if we have to take it online and create groups, I think we have to have support groups for each other, so we're not just operating even our ideas in some sort of isolation where I'm the only person in this part of Arizona, I'm the only person in this part of New Jersey, et cetera. I think we got to be connected to each other. We got to stay connected to each other. I want to just stress that again. I've said that this recording will be available for folks, and so I hope some of the stuff that we said is there. I have the same position I had in 1992 about racism when I was on MTV's The Real World. Racism is race plus power, period. That's not going to ever change. Racism is race plus power, just like sexism is sex plus power equals sexism. Classism is class plus power. We know what it is. The difference for me is that I've evolved to a space where I don't find it necessary to yell or curse people out or go off on people, quote unquote, to get my point across. I mean, I've been talking to folks on Facebook the last day or so about the situation with the brother who was stopped at the Walmart in Pennsylvania. And trust me, white folks are in there bugging out, saying crazy stuff, ignorant stuff, like seriously ignorant and disrespectful stuff. Kevin Powell has evolved to a point where I'm engaging. I still think what they're saying is mad ignorant, but I'm saying, here's some stuff to read. Here's some stuff to watch. Here's some ways you need to think about this. You're speaking from your limited education, and you're making yourself look very ignorant by doing that. It's coming with love. That's the difference for me. And I think that, I take ownership for anything that I've done wrong in my life. I have no problem doing that, even approaches. I even have done manhood workshops, Tim, where I've gone off on men, just impatient, like, and you know what the men did? They turned their ears off. Anyone who's if you come at people in a certain kind of way, I don't care what the ism is or the phobia or the system of oppression is, if you're yelling and screaming and going off on them, they're going to turn their ears off. But if you're really, really, really progressive or revolutionary or radical or militant or any of the words that you use, I think that love's got to be the foundation for the work that you do, and my greatest hero is Malcolm X. We know that Malcolm X famously said to a white sister who asked him, what could white folks do to help? He said nothing. When Malcolm X came from his pilgrimage to Mecca, he said one of the things that he regretted was telling that white sister nothing. He owned that mistake. He owned that approach to educating someone. Does that make sense, Tim?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's what I think about, and you and I have had this, Tim, you and I both have had to think on our feet with speeches, etc. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've said stuff. I'm like, did I just say that? I've gone back to my hotel room. Have you not gone back to your hotel room? Like, could I have said that better?
Oh, I do it all the time. Yeah.
Because I think part of being, doing this work, no matter who you are, whether you're Tim Wise or Kevin Powell, is to be constantly self-reflective and self-accountable. How could I do this better? I really want to answer that question about publishing because someone used the term self-publishing. Can I answer that question next?
Yeah.
This is for Shazan Thompson. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I absolutely reject the term self-publishing. I am not a self-published author. I'm a published author who simply decided to be my own publisher. I struck a partnership deal with Apple Books, this is wonderful. I get 70% of the book sales. They get 30%. Guess what the contract was like for my first 13 books? The publishing company got about 75, 80% of it. The writer got about 20% of it if they were lucky. That's what it is. And so I made a conscious decision to say, wait a minute, Kevin Powell, you've been publishing books since 1993. You're now in your 14th book. How about for a change, making a little bit of money from your own work? Because I've never gotten it. I've gotten zero in royalties for my first 13 books. Zero. And I also believe that people have so dirtied and polluted the term self-publishing. Why can't I say that I'm a publisher? I know as much about the publishing industry. Don't you, Tim Wise? At this point, you're in your 9th book. Sure. Between us, Tim Wise and I have 23 books. Think about that for a second. That means that we know contracts, we know publicity, we know marketing, we know how to do, we know how to get books out there to people. We know that we should have our books wherever we speak, etc. We know as much as the people who oftentimes say, put our books out, and sometimes we know more than them. That's the fact. I mean, Tim, if I can be honest about it, I'm not going to name the publishing companies, but, I've been sent to places like, we're going to send you to this book fair in blah, 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 city and state. It's going to sell a lot of books. I show up there and it's 2 people in a tent, me and 1 person in the audience. I'm like, this is absolutely insane. You just sent me across country for something that you didn't even know what was happening, but you thought because you're talking from your cubicle or your office, your desk in New York City, that you actually think what's going on in the country. Then I realized one day, Tim, people like me and Tim Wise travel the country extensively. Publishers, a lot of publishers, not all of them, say crazy stuff to you like your audience. Like, there's just one audience. I'm like, no, Tim, your audience is whoever reads your books. My audience is whoever reads my books. That's like everybody. So how dare you tell me who my audience is? And so I made a conscious decision. I'm going to publish this book with Apple Books. We're going to have a partnership. My company is also listed as a publisher for the book. And then I'm going to sell the book on Amazon. I've already done most of the audiobook. We're going to sell that as well. And I'm going to make most of the money for the books. Where did I get it from? It's called hip hop, y'all. It's called hip hop. What is the simple definition of hip hop? Making something out of nothing and winning on your own terms. Stop giving away your talent and your gifts to other people. I decided I can do this. I can just do my own stuff and do it my way on my terms. And Apple Books has created the space where I'm like, okay, let's amplify it. Let's put it out there with ebooks and then I'll take it from there. And it's been a wonderful experience. And I don't have to debate anyone about the content of the book. I can do the cover the way I want to, which I did. You know, I can hire my own publicist, which I did, to promote it the way I want to. Me and the publicist are teammates. We're teammates, not the publicist and I having this hierarchical relationship. And I love it. I love it. I love it. I wish I would have done it 7 books ago, honestly.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting about it too. And I mean, I've had good relationships. I've been very lucky. I've had good relationships with my publishers that have been small publishers. That never.
That's why you've had good relationships.
Yeah. They've been great.
Shout out to indie booksellers.
Absolutely. They've been great. But the thing I like about the model that you're talking about is, and not just for you or me or people that have done a lot of books, but some of the people that might be listening to this, y'all have got stories to tell. You have got important narratives that can be shared with the world. And there are opportunities now to do that are different than exist within the old sort of publishing paradigm. Yeah. So waiting around for a publisher, a big publisher, even a small indie house to pick up a book, even if they do that, if you could be an amazing writer and never get a book deal. You could be an amazing writer and by the time your book is done and then gets to press, it's dated. The information in it is old, especially if you're talking about issues like this. I've got an essay collection coming out in December that I'm having to update probably until the day we go to press, right? Because stuff is happening. But if you are listening to this call and you think, you know, I've got some stuff to say, I'm a writer, I'm a poet, these are platforms now that exist that people can take advantage of, electronic publications, audiobooks, et cetera. And I really encourage people to do that. Not to say that it's not great if you want to try to pitch a book to a publisher, but we've got so many truth tellers out there whose voices are never heard. And we need to break out of the mentality that says that the only voices worth hearing are the ones who are with the big 5 or big 10 publishers, right? There's some fine books coming out of those places. And there's some fine authors working with those places. And, you know, more power to them. But there's also a lot of people with truth to tell that need to tell it today and not go through the rigmarole of that legal process. So I want to encourage, you know, all of these options are on the table for writers and for artists, and being able to do things for yourself is a pretty empowering thing for people who have something to say.
And I love that. And let me say this, Timmy, this is, and for folks who are listening, who are watching, you know, Tim and I, and Tim, again, I love you, brother. And I just really appreciate this conversation so much. And you are my brother for life. The writing piece is important. So I also, folks, I made it a point, and I'm sure you have as well, Tim. I made it a point years ago, even when I was in my 20s as a young writer back in the 90s, I need to learn how to publish a book inside and out. You know, what is an ISBN? What does it mean to do publicity? What does it mean to do marketing? You know, I've had a hand in every single cover for every one of my books, even when publishers were resistant, like, you know, me bringing in an outside graphic designer, art director. I was like, well, nope, that's not what I don't, who said I have to have your cover? Why do I have to have your cover? I want my cover. I want my photograph. I want my artwork. That's what I want to do. And I've had a lot of battles. And, you know, even when they try to write copy, I learned how to write copy. You know, if you have a hardcover version of the book or even a paperback, you have the copy in the back. I write all of that stuff, you know. Yeah. I go get the blurbs. I learn how to get blurbs. I'm like, I learned how to get reviews done. I'm like, well, here's where we should send the books to. But the most important thing for me, y'all, is I've never stopped being in love with the craft of writing, the art of writing. I read voraciously. And as you can see from Brother Tim's bookshelf behind him, I was marveling at it yesterday because my stuff is mad disorganized right now. Because of the Tupac book, I got stuff all over the place. But like, I think if you're going to be a writer, you have to read. You have to read religiously. You got to read everything. You know, one of the reasons why I admire Tim Wise so much, his mind is expansive. When I listen to Tim Wise, people like Tim Wise, I not only hear an activist, an educator, I hear philosophy, I hear sociology, I hear psychology. You know, I mean, it's just, and I love being around people like Tim Wise because I'm like, this is what knowledge looks like. This is what constant education looks like. And then it filters itself into your writing. And so people like Tim Wise, like Dave Zirin from The Nation, like Bell Hooks, like V, formerly Eve Ensler, when they write their books, when they write these blogs, it's so insightful, it's so different than anything else you've heard because it's coming from a space of constantly learning and also practicing the craft of writing. And you got to write. You got to write. You know, people, I'm sure, Tim, do people ask you all the time, how do you write so much? Do people ask you that?
Yeah. But the truth is, and I don't know about you, I mean, we got 23 books between us, but my writing work ethic is for shit. I'm just going to be honest. Like, I don't, like, it's bad. Like, I mean, I've written all this stuff, but I mean,
I don't write blogs like you do, though. You write a blog every week.
But man, I'll do that for like a month, and then I haven't written anything in like 3 weeks, right? So it's like it's binging and purging. It's not real healthy. But it's the only, you know, my process is what it is, and I've learned to just sort of embrace it. But I'm like you, the only way that I could become an even halfway decent writer was reading, not just reading, but reading good writing.
Exactly.
And you know, because lots of people can write, and lots of people that are great writers are not necessarily well known, read them too. But only when I started doing that,
That's right.
did I really understand what it meant to craft prose.
That's
You know, I
right.
could put words on a page, and I could always run my mouth. The speaking thing was easier for me. That came much more naturally. The writing thing, that is a craft that very few people are born with that set of skills, and you really have to develop that over time. And I think, you know, I always tell people, if you want to do it, it is just one of those things you just write. You know, I mean, it sounds banal, like, well, how do I write? You just write. You write about whatever, right? You know, write about what matters to you. And even if you're not writing for other people to see it, even if you're only writing, I mean, when I wrote my memoir, and I'm sure this is partly true for yours as well, there's part of that, the revelatory piece, which is a part of your voice that you use a lot. It's very revelatory.
Yes, sir.
Very transparent, very honest. I try to do the same thing. And sometimes I know you probably get pushback, and I do too, on it, because there are those readers who feel like this confessional mode of writing is somehow, I don't know, either they feel it's less political, or it doesn't have the bite, or it doesn't have the analysis, or it's too self-indulgent. I've even heard it referred to as narcissistic. But the thing is, it seems to me, right, that connecting your personal to the political is the only way that we stay in the work.
That's right.
I don't see, you know, I didn't come to my anti-racism through a critical race theory class.
That's right.
I didn't come to my anti-racism through politics. I came to my anti-racism going to preschool at a historically Black college early childhood ed program, where all of my close friends were Black kids. I know all white people say we got Black friends. Most of us are lying. That's like all I had in the early years.
Right.
And having Black women that ran that program, who I was learning to respect their authority when I was 3 years old. And then when I get into elementary school and I see those Black children being treated like crap by teachers, being punished more harshly, being placed in remedial classes, and they're my friends, that's how I come to my anti-racism. It's relational, it's narrative, it's story. It's not a bunch of data. It's none of this shit on the shelf behind me.
Wow.
It's, you know, these are nice books that fill in the gaps of my knowledge, so that I can take those experiences and connect them to something systemic and sociological. But I didn't come to this because I took a really cool class in college, you know? And I feel like sometimes that's the value of memoir. When I read your memoir, those stories, that's how you understand the class system, because you lived it. That's how you understand white supremacy, because you lived it, not because you majored in something where they made you read it, right? So that voice is really important for people to connect to, it seems.
Oh my God, Tim, I got chills just listening, brother. That was powerful, and thank you for sharing that. And you know, for folks out there, I was going to, and I still plan on doing it. I want to do some writing workshops for free, sometime this summer, hopefully in August, and I'll promote it, post it out there. Daniel Galan, if you're listening, maybe we can do it in partnership with the New Eurekan, because I want to support you guys always. I love the New Eurekan Poets Cafe. Shout out to y'all again. Nick, Jason, Daniel, all the folks at the New Eurekan. That's why I became a writer. I knew when I was a kid that I wanted to do something. I felt like my voice was suppressed, you know, it was suppressed for so many different reasons. And I can't imagine not telling my stories. And I used to be embarrassed of using the word I, Tim, like, you know, and because I was taking those writing classes in college, like, you shouldn't say I. I'm well, what do we say then? He, you know what I'm saying? Should I talk in third person? I don't know what to do. Right. I mean, and I knew I wasn't going to be a fiction writer. I was like, that's out the window. You know, I want to write. I you know, you discover Baldwin and all these folks, and I, even my Tupac biography that I'm working on now, I've decided I cannot. One of my professors in college was Dr. Arnold Rampersad, who was one of our great literary biography writers, and I asked him for advice. He said, don't do what I did. He wrote a 2-volume biography of Langston Hughes. He's written about Jackie Robinson, Ralph Ellison. And that gave me the permission to say, okay, when I write this Tupac Shakur biography, I cannot write a quote unquote traditional biography, because there are going to be points where I'm going to need to insert I into this book. You know what I mean? And so I started seeking out biographies like David Henderson's great biography of Jimi Hendrix, where David is one of the characters in the book, actually, because he actually crossed paths with Jimi Hendrix. And I said, well, how could I write a book about Tupac? And I'm not gonna put myself all over the book, because I'm not that kind of person. But there are moments when I'm going to have to insert myself, and I got to be able to write like a Gay Talese from Esquire, or the way Mailer wrote about JFK, you know, when JFK was running for president in 1960. And why can't we do that? The way Baldwin wrote, you know, when Baldwin wrote about the Nation of Islam and about the Black church and the fire next time, I mean, that's one of the most powerful personal essays I've ever read in my life. I'm like, I mean, when this man said this God is not working, we may not go should go find a new one. I'm like, who has who says that?
Right.
Someone who's confident of their voice.
Right.
And that's what a writer has to be, confident of their voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Couple more questions on here real quick. Any feedback you have on our dear friend Senator Tom Cotton, appropriately named from Arkansas, his comment about slavery being a necessary evil, I think is the term that he used the other day. Anything you want to say about that?
I mean, slavery was evil, racism is evil, sexism is evil, anti-Semitism is evil, Islamophobia is evil, hatred in any form is evil. Ignorance is evil. Tom Cotton practices enthusiastic ignorance. That's what I call it, enthusiastic ignorance. Because not only are you ignorant, but you're actually wallowing and celebrating the ignorance. How are you going to say that slavery was a necessary evil? For who? You know what I'm saying? I mean, there's nothing else to say to it. It's what Tom, and let me say this. My brain is about to explode 10-wise. We got to stop saying, folks out there, that racism has emerged or gotten worse because of Donald Trump. You have not had a conversation with a black or brown or yellow or red person in your life if you really believe that. Seriously. If you really believe that it's somehow gotten worse with Donald Trump. However, what the Trump era has done is allowed all these folks to take off, quote unquote, the mask and just be who they really are out front and in a way that we have not seen since my mama was born in 1943 in South Carolina, the Low Country, proud Geechees, and her birth certificate was stamp colored. That's what we're seeing in 2020. I'm hearing elders say it feels like how it felt during segregation. That part is true. That part is true.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, because that makes me think of something. So that's happening at one level, right? We have this not intensification, but this peeling back the veil that is covered in some people's minds, this problem that has always been there. But we also have this countervailing tendency in this trend of this massive uprising. And we haven't really talked a lot about it, but let me ask you this.
Let's do it.
Do you think that in this moment where we have millions of people, truly millions of people pouring into the streets over the last 8 weeks, obviously tapering off now as these things are wont to do, but people get nervous about that. But I look at it like the sit-ins when they start in February of 1960. I mean, right now we're just at the end of March 1960 right now. So when people start thinking like, oh, the movement is losing steam, like y'all, SNCC hasn't even, Ella Baker still hadn't had the meeting yet at Shaw. You know what I mean? Like that's where we are, right? Yep. So why are people freaking out? Well, they're freaking out because the way we teach the movement, right, is just one victory after another victory after another victory. We don't talk about Albany, Georgia, 1962, which was one of Dr. King's biggest defeats. We don't talk about the times that it didn't click and it didn't work. So here we are in this moment, and you got all these people that are joining this struggle for the first time. Do you think that this moment is likely to be different than prior moments, or is this just going to be one of those blips where folks go back when we get on the other side of Corona, for instance, and people go back to their much more normal routine where we're actually out and about more, doing more stuff? Are people, including all these white folks that are now showing up as quote unquote allies, are they just going to hit the snooze button again on the alarm clock, or are people awake now? And how do we ensure that it's the latter of those and not the former of those?
Well, that's a great question. I was hoping if we could even spend the last bit of time about this, that'd be great. It's 8:44, y'all. We got about 16 minutes, I believe, unless Daniel and New Yorican folks are gonna let us go a few minutes over. We're getting great responses. We appreciate you. I love my brother, Tim Wise. Just thank you for doing this with me. I think, Tim, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it as well, please. I think that the ascension of Donald Trump, which shocked a lot of people in this country, including a lot of white folks, is part of the reason why we see this mass protest movement that's happening now that is labeled, still, identified with Black Lives Matter. I think it's definitely what the pandemic has done to us, not just physically, but also emotionally, spiritually, has had a profound effect, even though it's been 4 months. But I mean, we are now at over 150,000 Americans dead. To put that in context, we lost 290,000 or so Americans during World War II. It's very likely that we're going to pass, and World War II is the biggest number of fatalities in any American war. It was very likely we may pass that number by the end of 2020. I want y'all to think about that for a second. I think that's having a devastating effect, but it's also, it's what the pandemic has done is exposing capitalism, the political process, the healthcare system, the racism, the classism, how we feel about workers in this country, all those different things that come to fore. And then what is the third thing? The Emmett Till moment, as I call it. Yes, we've seen many other Black folks killed over the last several years, Sandra Bland, you know, Tamir Rice, you know, Trayvon Martin, et cetera. But there's something about that white police officer kneeling down on the neck of George Floyd for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, emotionless, stoical, knowing he's being filmed by several different camera phones and having no human reaction whatsoever until this man is calling mama, mama, mama. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Just like Eric Garner did here in New York City a few years ago. And we literally watched this cop, this white cop, which was no different than those photos from back in the day of white men standing, posing for a picture as a Black body is hanging from a tree. And I believe that the combination of Donald Trump becoming president of the United States and the insanity of this man, his racism, his sexism, all of it, and what he has done to this country, and the pandemic, and that singular video of George Floyd being kneed to death is why we've seen millions of people pour into the streets. And I want people to understand that a movement is a mass energy of people, but a movement also goes on for a period of time. For the sake of argument, the civil rights movement, as Tim said, we're talking about periods of time, literally is from 1955. Well, what happened in let's just say 54, 55. What happened in 1954? The Supreme Court decision, Brown versus the Board of Education. What happened in 1955? Two significant things. One is a Black boy named Emmett Till is brutally beaten and killed in Mississippi in the summer of 1955. And then by December, a woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus. The civil rights movement, for the sake of argument, at least went on until 1968 when Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy were killed. That's 13 years, y'all. 13 years of work. You heard Tim mention the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which wasn't founded until 1960, 61. You know, things like Albany, Georgia. There was things happening all over the country. Nashville. We got to talk about people like Diane Nash. You mentioned Ella Baker, Faneuil Hamer. There was movement and work happening everywhere. The key word is that people consistently did the work. It wasn't just marches and rallies and protests, but if you look at John Lewis, think about the fact that John Lewis, when you watch the documentary that CNN did, and shout out to my friends Ben Arnon and Erica Alexander, co-producers of it, they were trained. There was leadership training. There was preparation. They read, they studied, they traveled. That's one thing I say over and over again. If you're going to be in the movement, any movement, you have to hashtag read, study, travel, hashtag read, study, travel. That's what they were doing. And they had mentors, elders like Ella Baker, who were taking the time to prepare people to be out there. And so it's important that as we take a step back right now and see what happens with the officers in Minnesota and other places, are we actually taking the time to know this history, which is all on the walls, the shelves behind Tim Wise? And are we also taking the time? Because if you're serious about helping your community, you got to be prepared. You got to be prepared. You have to be prepared. And you got to know, you just don't happen into being a writer. You don't just happen to being a speaker. You don't happen to being an organizer. You actually have to study other people who have read, who have spoken, and who have organized. And that's the fundamental thing that I think about right now. I'm going to be participating in a big march and rally on Saturday with local YMCAs here in New York City. And it's being organized by folks who actually have been doing movement work for a long time. And it's really important that younger people and older people, enough of the generational divide, stop that. Stop it, stop it, stop it, please. Just like I hate racism, I hate sexism, this generational separation stuff. You know what? Stop saying that young people have to do it. No, we all have to do it. Ella Baker was an elder. Ella Baker was an elder who was mentoring younger people. We need a multicultural, multi-generational progressive movement in this country. And that's what I see happening, the inklings of it. But people have to be willing to do the work. And I'm not going to say the name of the organization that I'm going to start sometime by the end of this year. Tim, I got so much on my plate like you do, like finishing this Tupac book. But the point of the organization that we're going to build is to actually do real leadership training, because I think that's important. I'm like, what can I contribute? I've been thinking about this a lot, Tim. I want to help, prepare people to do this work for the long haul. Just like you and I have been doing this we got 23 books between us. We've probably been doing this work for like 50 years between us. Well, our responsibility now is also to help other people do the work. And that's what I want to do.
Yeah, I think that this moment, and I agree with you about all the reasons why this moment is so critical and what's brought us to this point. I definitely think that the election of Donald Trump is what allowed some white folks to begin to realize what they had suppressed during the Obama years, because we know what the argument was during the Obama years, even among white liberal folks, right, was,
yes.
Oh, thank God we've sort of put that behind us, right?
Yes.
That we
Yes.
have elected this black man president. And like I said, these white folks going up hugging black women at the Detroit airport thinking that racism had been vanquished. And Donald Trump's election, though I'm not glad it happened, you gotta find a silver lining in every cloud. And part of it was that it allowed people to see some stuff that they had really believed was not there. And then when you add to that the vulnerability created by COVID, I mean, to me, this is the dispositive thing here.
Yes.
That when you, because for black folks and folks of color more broadly, but especially for black folks, the question, is it safe to go to the store, is not a pandemic question.
That's right.
That's not a 2020 question. That's a question that black folks have asked every year forever.
That's right.
Is it safe to go to the park? Well, you could ask Tamir Rice, but you can't, and we know why.
That's right.
Is it safe to go to Walmart? Well, you could ask John Crawford, but you can't, and we know why. Is it safe to walk around the neighborhood with Skittles and Arizona iced tea? Well, you could ask Trayvon, but you can't, and we know why. Is it safe to go for a jog? You could ask Ahmaud Arbery, but you can't, and we know why. Is it safe to go to sleep in your own house? You could ask Breonna Taylor, but you can't, and we know why. In this moment, we have millions of white people who, for the first time, now some white women have certainly known what it is, and white trans folk have known what it is, and white LGBTQ folk more broadly, what it is to worry about their safety. But for millions of white people,
that's right,
particularly middle class and above, that question
that's
of, am I gonna have a job in 4 months? Am I gonna have health care? Is it gonna cover if I get sick with this awful illness? Those are normal black questions, pre-pandemic black questions. Right. Existential black questions.
Pre-Trump black questions.
Exactly. Pre-Trump and gonna be post-Trump unless this thing ends, right? So what you have is, for the first time, millions of white people being put into a space of vulnerability that we're not used to.
That's
and the horror of that is that it's costing a lot of those white folks their lives and their loved ones their lives. The one thing we need to be able to take out of that, though, to redeem those 150,000, God forbid down the line, maybe 300,000 or more deaths, is get a sense of what the lesson here. The lesson here is this: all those white folks who thought that their white neighbors and their white friends and their white colleagues were on their side because they all voted alike and they all had the same kind of cultural affectations. Now you come to realize, wait a minute, my white neighbor that's going to the state capitol with camouflage and semi-automatic weapons, talking about opening everything back up and the coronavirus is a hoax. And here I am. What if I'm a white person with an immunosuppressed child? What if I'm a white person with a partner or a spouse that has diabetes? What if I'm a white person who just loves my grandmother and doesn't want to kill her because somebody wants to go to the bar and doesn't want to wear a mask at Costco because they think that's tyranny, right? All of a sudden, if I'm that white person, I'm realizing, hold on, maybe these other white folks are not on my team after all. Maybe my team is Black Lives Matter. Maybe that's my team. Because they're the ones that want health care for everybody. And they're the ones that want job opportunities for everybody. And they're the ones that didn't create the hierarchy of human value. What created the hierarchy of human value was white supremacy. And the irony is, there are some white folks who thought that that could be contained in this little space that would only kill black folks and would only hurt the people on the other side of town. And now it came back to hurt us because, you know, as the saying goes, they don't love you either, right? They don't love you. They don't love elderly folk and people with pre-existing conditions. That's why they're trying to get the ACA overturned, because the idea is, if you have a pre-existing condition, something's wrong with you. That's a eugenic mentality. Where do you think the eugenic mentality came from? White supremacy. So this is how white supremacy eats its own.
That's right.
White supremacy ultimately will destroy even the people for whom it was set up. So my hope is that in this moment, this will be the thing that will keep white folks in the fight. Realizing that even though we're not the targets of white supremacy, black people are, other folks of color are the targets of white supremacy, but we're the collateral damage of white supremacy. And we've created a system that is toxic first and foremost for black and brown, but then some of that sprays on us as well. And so this isn't about charity work. This isn't about savior work, right? This is about self-help, that thing that we like to preach to other people, but we don't take it very seriously sometimes.
You know, it's interesting because when Donald Trump got elected, Brother Tim, I remember a lot of white sisters and brothers, what we in the Black community call emotionally rioting. And I got a lot of messages from people, what are we going to do? And what I remember thinking, and again, you know, I have great compassion. I remember thinking, well, we as in Black folks going to just do what we've been doing. We got to keep going. We got no choice. You know, and if Trump gets reelected, we as Black folks just got to keep going. I mean, because we've lived through Andrew Jackson. We've lived through,
right.
I mean, what, 15 of the first 17 presidents were slave masters, owned slaves at some point, some number
right.
like that. I mean, you know, right. and if we, I mean, you know, we have no choice as Black folks. And I do agree with everything you just said was so brilliant and on point, because I do think that it is now spraying on white brothers and sisters, because Donald Trump has essentially said, y'all who voted for Hillary Clinton, I could care less about you. Y'all who are Democrats, I could care about half the white population in this country. And white folks are like, my God, what is this? And so I do think that's part of it. But we needed to become deeper. We need you to become like V, formerly Evans. So we need to become like Tim Wise. We need to become like Howard Zinn and other folks, you know, Noam Chomsky. You need to really become consistent and show up in this work. And it just can't become this trendy thing where I'm going to, as Tim said earlier, put Black Lives Matter in my window. I mean, do you challenge the curriculum? Do you challenge local government? Do you challenge, you know, what's going to have police forces policing? I want to, you know, people are throwing out references to books that we should read. I want to suggest a book called The End of Policing, The End of Policing. And it's like, you know, one of the things that's said in the book is that at some point in the history of the police actually were given all these jobs that they're not even qualified to do. They're social workers, they're so-called mental health experts, they're conflict resolution people. You want to know why there's so much violence from police? Think about all the stuff they're being asked to do. They're not even qualified to do. You know what I'm saying? That's why you see this whole defund police movement. And I think there's just like we have to talk, we were talking earlier about this restorative justice piece, we need white brothers and sisters to be a part of all these conversations, because it actually ultimately affects all of us. And it's really about the future of this country, because, you know, it's funny, Tim, and I'll end it here. I remember the New York Times Magazine ran an article maybe 10 years ago, maybe you and some other folks saw it, but it, you know, we all know they compared America to the Roman Empire, and we kind of know what happened with the Roman Empire, you know what I'm saying? Because it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It thinks it's invincible, but what we're seeing now is what Chano Achebe said, in, you know, famously, things fall apart, and that's what's happening. Things are falling woefully apart. And I believe that the Obama years was just kind of a slowing down of what was going to happen inevitably. Things were going to fall apart. Even the way he was treated, the way Michelle was treated, Obama was treated, all of it is part of the problem, which is this society is rooted in a kind of reckless capitalism and white supremacy and patriarchy, sexism, that really is harmful to all of us at the end of the day.
Well, and that's the bottom line. If you're happy with the way things are going, then just keep on that track. But if you're not, acknowledge that the things that are creating the pain are the very things that you just mentioned. And that's something that we all, if we could get clear on that, it would change the whole nature of politics and social commentary in our country. We are right up against the end of time. I want to take what little time we have left to thank all the people who came on the call. I apologize that we didn't get to everybody's questions. But Kevin, thank you so much for having me on the call. Thank you to the folks at Know Your Rican Poets for having us on this Zoom webinar this evening. The book, Kevin's new book, is When We Free the World. Tell folks how they can get that real quick before we run out of time.
Just go to Apple Books. It's an ebook right now, and yes, it will be a paperback and an audio book by September. I can guarantee that. But go to Apple Books. You have to have an iPhone, a Mac computer, or iPad to read it with Apple Books. That's cool. We'll get to everyone else sooner or later, but I had to do this my way. That's why it's with Apple Books. And I want to thank you, Tim, and the New York Rican Post Cafe. Tim, I want to suggest we do a part 2 later this year. Can we do that? And we can do it.
Anytime.
Let's support your book the next time. Seriously.
We'll do it.
Okay.
All right, brother. Thank you so much. Appreciate y'all.
Peace to y'all. Love y'all.